Hello, ladies and gentlemen, James here. Hope you're doing fine and well out there. Had to kind of redo my video here. I hit my timer before I did that. Don't you hate that when you're making the video and all of a sudden some freaky happened to the camera? But anyway, I'm making a video today, and it's a topic of really an eye opener. It's a social issue dealing with race, and it's why black people think the way they do, why they feel the way they do, why the issue of race keep coming up the way that they do, and this gonna probably give you an idea of where this came from, and maybe it'll get a better understanding of why the people non-black why we think the way they do. All right then.
We mentioned earlier in the beginning, he came to believe.
Hold on. Okay.
Now, it's no secret that many of the people in America who identify themselves as black have an inferiority complex. And this inferiority, it expresses itself in the form of perming and pressing hair. It manifests in the form of skin bleaching. It rears its head in the psychology and the self-esteem of many of the members from this group. But the question is, how did they get this inferiority complex? Were they born with it? Is it something genetic? Or were there some other circumstances which caused it? And so sociologist Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, he provides an explanation for this in his 1957 book, Black Bourgeoisie. So let's open it up right now to page 130, where it says this: the entire history of the Negro in the United States has been of a nature to create in the Negro a feeling of racial inferiority, which was the intention of the European slaveholder. And why would they want to create a people with a feeling of inferiority? Because they wanted to create permanent slaves out of this group of people for money and control. And so one of the very first instances that sparked this feeling of inferiority was the European colonizer naming these people with clearly visible brown skin Negro or black. And black is a word in English that is directly linked with many negative ideas such as evil, wicked, and gloomy. And it had these meanings before it was placed on this group of people with brown skin. And being called black in the Western world has negative unconscious effects on a person's self-esteem and the way that they see themselves. And so the colonizer labeled people black in the very beginning of this project of creating a people with a deep inferiority complex. And this was just the beginning, right? There's a lot more. Here we go. During the more than 2 centuries of enslavement by the white man, every means was employed to stamp a feeling of natural inferiority in the Negro soul. And he's not exaggerating when he says this. The whites used every tool that they can think of, from the name black to this next tool right here. Christianity and the Bible were utilized both to prove and to give divine sanction to his alleged racial inferiority, or, as some contended, his exclusion from the races of mankind. And the Bible was a very powerful tool that they used to morally justify their deeds so they would be able to sleep at night. And we'll get more on the way that they use the Bible in religion later on. Let's continue. When the system of slavery was uprooted in a Second American Revolution, it appeared for a brief period that the Negro might receive recognition as a man. But as the result of the unresolved class conflict in which the democratic forces in the South were defeated, the demagogues who became the leaders of the disinherited whites, but really served the interest of the property classes, made the Negro the scapegoat. A legalized system of racial segregation was established, which stigmatized the Negro as unfit for human association. And every type of propaganda was employed to prove that the Negro was morally degenerate and intellectually incapable of being educated. And basically using propaganda to create a false narrative about these brown-skinned people who they named black. And for what reason? To make them feel inferior, right? Inferior to who? The Europeans who reinvented themselves into white people in the 1600s.
Chevy lets you begin every day fully charged, so you could go farther, and so...
The Europeans who reinvented themselves into white people in the 1600s The black was to symbolize inferiority,
That's where white
and the
comes
white
from.
was to be the opposite, superiority, which is why they changed themselves from English over into white in the 1600s. And so we're talking about deep layer mental psychology here, not some surface level games that these people were playing. They're playing the real deal game. But understand that none of this would have worked if the next thing here didn't happen. Living constantly under the domination and contempt of the white man, the Negro came to believe in his own inferiority, whether he ignored or accepted the values of the white man's world.
Yep.
And what's the key word here? Believe. The Negro came to believe in his own inferiority. And that's the entire game being played. It's a game of belief, and you haven't come to realize it yet, but you eventually will. And so the white ruling class, they needed to get them to believe that they were subhuman, unintelligent, incapable, wicked, and black, right? And other destructive ideas to make them feel a sense of inferiority. And once they believed this, they would act accordingly because people's actions reflect their dominant beliefs and desires. So once you understand that this is the game that is being played, a game of beliefs, then you'll have the clue that's needed for yourself to climb out of the pit that they dug. Let's continue. The black bourgeoisie, the element which has striven more than any other element among Negroes to make itself over in the image of the white man, exhibits most strikingly the inferiority complex of those who would escape their racial identification. And this is the group right here that thought that money and material things were going to allow them to be accepted by the whites. And let me tell you that if you're someone that's from this community and your goal is to be accepted by whites, then you're playing a losing game, right? You're playing a losing game and the wrong game. Your number one concern needs to be being accepted by yourself first. Then the rest of the acceptance comes as an effect of you accepting yourself and respecting yourself, right? You shouldn't expect anyone to accept or to respect you if you don't first respect or accept yourself, right? Humans don't work that way. Let's continue. Despite the human relations which developed between Negroes and whites on the plantation, where a paternalistic type of control developed, the Negro was, nevertheless, an article of commerce, or an animate tool, according to Aristotle's definition of a slave. An animate or a living tool, right? That's how he described the slave. A tool for what? To work and to make the slave master rich, right? That's what the slave system was about. Let's continue. If any recognition were shown him as a person, it was conceded to a person who represented a lower and inferior order of mankind. Reduced to a chattel in an alien land, the enslaved Negro was not only detribalized as the African who had contact with European civilization, but he was annihilated as a person. Completely annihilated, where his consciousness was dragged down into the burning inferno. Let's continue. The enslavement of the Negro in the United States destroyed not only his family ties and his household gods, it effaced or eliminated whatever memories of the African homeland that had survived the Middle Passage. And Africa really became a distant memory, where some of the last memories from the ancestors were being captured by other African tribes who traded them for European goods. Let's continue. The destruction of a common tradition and religious beliefs and practices reduced the Negro to a mere atom without a personality or social identity. And I would add, without a social identity that they created for themselves, because they did have a social identity that was given to them by the whites. It was called a Negro or black people, and they were supposed to be at the bottom of society, right? That was their social identity. The main significance of the proselyting of the Baptist and Methodist missionaries was that Christianity was presented to the slaves in a simple, emotional appeal that provided a release for their frustrated and repressed lives. More than that, it established a bond of union among the slaves and provided them a meaning of their existence in an alien world. Although Christianity offered the Negro an interpretation of his existence in an alien world, it did not undertake to change his earthly condition as regards his enslavement. When for economic reasons, during the 17th century, the Negro indentured servant lost the status which white indentured servants had and became a servant for life, or a slave, the colonial legislation made it clear that the conversion to Christianity meant freedom not for the body in this world, but for the soul in the afterlife. And this happened because there was a loophole in the system where Christians could not be enslaved. And so the problem was that if the Negro was converted to being a Christian, then they could no longer be enslaved. Well, they fixed that quickly because they went and changed the man-made laws, and they stated that the status of a Christian would no longer be a justification for making someone a free person in the physical world, right? And that freedom for the Negro was meant for this idea of the afterlife, which is another invention coming from the imagination of the human mind. Let's continue going. Not only did Christianity fail to offer the Negro hope of freedom in this world, but the manner in which Christianity was communicated to him tended to degrade him. The Negro was taught that his enslavement was due to the fact that he had been cursed by God. And this is another example of humans making stuff up, right? And again, using the idea of God to justify their doings. Let's continue. His very color was a sign of the curse which he had received as a descendant of Ham. Parts of the Bible were carefully selected to prove that God had intended that the Negro should be the servant of the white man, and that he would always be a hewer of wood and drawer of water. And understand that any person could find a verse in the Bible and interpret it in such a way to support just about any doctrine that they could think of. And what these people were doing was using it in a way to intensify a feeling of inferiority within the Negro. Let's continue. While such was being taught the slave, some of the leading ministers of the South were setting forth the same doctrine in books for the American public. One of these books, written by a Presbyterian minister and entitled The Christian Doctrine of Slavery, stated that it may be that Christian slavery is God's solution of the problem, relation of labor and capital, about which the wisest statesmen of Europe confessed themselves at fault. Right? It was God's solution to the labor and capital problem. You see how slick and how crafty these people were? Not their own solution, but it was God's solution, right? This is how people play the game. Let's continue. Another leading minister published a book entitled Slavery Ordained of God, in which he defended the doctrine that slavery is ordained of God, and to continue for the good of the slave, the good of the master, the good of the whole American family, until another and better destiny may be unfolded. And so these people were acting as if they were having lunch meetings with God, and as if God was mentoring them on how to run the slave economy. And this is why you always have to be very mindful on how people use the idea of God, because a lot of people play a lot of games with it, as we're seeing here. Let's continue. These theological justifications of the enslavement of the Negro gave religious support to the philosophical justifications of slavery, the most celebrated of which was that by a professor of history, metaphysics, and political law at William and Mary College, Virginia. In a book published in 1832, he justified the enslavement of the Negro on the grounds that the Negro possessed the strength and form of a man, but the intellect of a child, and was therefore unfit for freedom. These were the type of ideas that they were using to craft the Negro in the image that they wanted him in, right? And just like we mentioned earlier in the beginning, one of the great...
Can I interrupt right here? Yes, so imagine from that generation of people all the way now on the white side of some white people teaching their children this stuff, teaching generations in high school and college this stuff, teaching this in the household. This is what they think. This is the truth. This is what they think. Some people who are white, who are, that's when they see. That's why some people are saying, I don't see color. How can you not see color? Subconsciously, you see color because you were taught to see color.
Responsibilities that we have is...
We mentioned earlier in the beginning, he came to believe in his own inferiority. Let's continue. The nearly 600,000 mulattoes among the somewhat less than 4.5 million Negroes in the United States in 1860 were the result of the sexual association of white men and Negro women.
Boom.
The character of the sexual association between white men and Negro women ranged from rape based upon physical force, or the authority of the master to voluntarily surrender on the part of the Negro woman. And this was the white slave master acting like a truly subhuman person, right? The real deal. Let's continue. Voluntary surrender on the part of the Negro woman was due at times to mutual attraction, but the prestige of the white race was often sufficient to secure compliance on their part. In giving themselves to their white masters, there were certain concrete advantages to be gained, such as freedom from the drudgery of field work, better food and clothing, and the prospect that their half-white children would enjoy certain privileges and perhaps be emancipated. As the mulatto class grew in the South, many slaveholders, if married, set up a separate household for their black, but more often mulatto concubines. In some cases, they lived a monogamous life with their mulatto mistress or concubine, legal marriage being forbidden. But even under the most favorable conditions, the woman and her offspring were stigmatized because of their Negro ancestry. It was out of such association that the communities of free mulattoes grew up in the South. In some parts of the South, they constituted a sort of lower caste, since no matter how well off they might be economically, they always bore the stigma of Negro ancestry. Even in Louisiana, where the quadroons or gens de colère became wealthy and sent their children to France to be educated, they were still without political rights and could not associate with whites on a basis of equality. They identified themselves as far as possible with the interest of the white slave-holding aristocracy and did not even permit a discussion of slavery among their members. Although they were not white, they could thank God they were not black. Religion and political philosophy rallied to the support of the planters in the South by confirming the racial inferiority of the Negro, along with science as well. These were the tools that they were using to confirm the image of the Negro's inferiority, which was created within the imagination of white folks. Let's continue. This support became especially urgent as the conflict between the economic interests of the North and the South became more acute, and the issue over slavery acquired a moral character. Whether the Negro was only chattel property and, therefore, had no rights as a human being became an issue in the celebrated Dred Scott case, which was taken to the Supreme Court. Now, can you imagine that? People having full-blown discussions on whether or not certain humans were only chattel property, right? This is what it looks like when people are blinded by power and making profits.
Still to this day.
Let's continue. In 1857, Chief Justice Taney of the Supreme Court, which was dominated by the South, handed down the famous decision: a Negro has no rights which a white man need respect. The court declared that in the meaning of the words, people of the United States, in the Constitution, Negroes were not included in the people of the United States. This represented the final triumph of the Southern aristocracy in its struggle to dominate the United States.
That's why the United States is going to pay for what she's doing to us, because she put in the Constitution, and America used the Constitution to justify what he's saying to this day. Everything is generational. People say it's just the past. These things carry in your workplace. It's carried when you own property. It can, and I'm going to show you it on land too. Watch this.
Public opinion and the personal attitudes of whites concerning the Negroes were being formed by politicians and newspapers. There appeared in 1900 a book entitled The Negro a Beast, published by the American Book and Bible House. And once again, more propaganda to influence the public perception of the Negro. Let's continue. The publisher of this book stated in the preface that if this book were considered in an intelligent and prayerful manner, that it will be to the minds of the American people like unto the voice of God from the clouds appealing to Paul on his way to Damascus. In order that the American people might be convinced of the scientific nature of the biblical truths presented in this book, the author included pictures of God and an idealized picture of a white man in order to prove that white people were made in the image of God.
Boom.
As stated in the Bible, and a caricature of the Negro showing that he could not have been made in the image of God. You see that?
Yeah.
I've been using Epidemic Sound as my go-to
Now, whenever they show you paintings and pictures and movies, what do they display? All the biblical characters. They always, whether they're doing a commercial or how Jesus or how, and they show you how Isaiah. Look on your social media. It looks the same thing. So when black people and other people see it, they see white people. They see white people like that. That's what they see, and they take a renaissance of a painting, and put people in biblical clothing to tell their story of the Bible. But yet, when black people raise this up, you're making it about race. You're making it about race when actually the Bible explains what the demographic of the people look like. But even when they show the demographic in certain passages in the Bible, they still make it white. This is the reason why some black people don't like Christianity.
As the institution of slavery became more entrenched, the attitudes towards slave literacy began to change. Economic reliance on slave labor grew, and with it, the fear of slave rebellion and the desire to maintain absolute control over the enslaved population. Literacy among slaves came to be seen as a potential threat to the established order. Early colonial laws did not specifically address the education of slaves. At this point in time, slaves were taught to read and write by missionaries, in other cases through informal means. As the fear of educated slaves increased, so did the legal measures to prevent black literacy. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Southern states enacted laws specifically designed to prohibit the education of black slaves. These laws were severe and strictly enforced, reflecting the pervasive anxiety about the potential consequences of an educated slave population. In this eye-opening video, we're delving into another very dark chapter of history that has had lasting effects on black community as a whole: the prohibition of learning to read and write for black people in the United States during the slave era. We are going to be exploring the multifaceted causes behind this prohibition, examining economic, social, legal, and ideological factors. By understanding these motivations, we would have gained some insight into the mechanisms of control which, at this point in history, were employed by slaveholders in the broader society, and how these measures sought to perpetuate a system of racial subjugation. Be kind to hit the thumb button, share with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to settle with us for more interesting and revealing videos like this one. Without further ado, let us delve in.
Find it with the AARP Life Insurance Program from New York Life, because at this stage of your
Let us delve in. In the early years of American colonization, labor was a crucial necessity for the survival and economic prosperity of colonies. Europeans had attempted to enslave Native Americans, but many succumbed to disease or either escaped. Africans were seen as a more viable labor source, immune to European diseases and unfamiliar with the terrain, making escape more difficult. For this very reason, they set out to keep black slaves down and under, for they had known that absolute illiteracy came with absolute servitude, and they were bent on ensuring this. As the number of African slaves increased, colonies enacted laws to regulate and control this population. These laws, known as slave codes, were designed to limit the freedom of slaves and ensure their subservience. For instance, in 1705, the Virginia slave codes were established, severely restricting the rights of slaves and formalizing their status as property. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, slavery became deeply entrenched in the southern colonies' economic and social fabric. By the 19th century, the invention of the cotton gin had revolutionized the agricultural economy, leading to an increased demand for slave labor. Slavery expanded westward, following the agricultural frontier, and became a critical element of American economic growth. The economic motives behind the denial of literacy to black slaves were deeply intertwined with the foundations of the American economy, particularly in the South. This economic system depended on maintaining a large, submissive, and uneducated labor force. Slaveholders believed that an illiterate slave population was easier to control and less likely to challenge the status quo. The American South's economy relied heavily on cash crops such as tobacco, rice, and, most importantly, cotton. These crops required intensive labor, which was supplied almost entirely by enslaved Africans. The profitability of plantations was directly tied to the exploitation of this labor force, making the control of slaves a paramount concern for slave owners. The restriction on blacks' reading and writing has a long history rooted in the institution of slavery and the desire of slave owners to maintain control over their enslaved population. You may have heard in one way or the other the quote which says, "If you want to hide something from a black man, then you must write it in a book." I'm sure you must now be seeing where this ridiculous adage came from, amongst many others. Education was, in those dark eras, a forbidden fruit for enslaved African Americans. The prohibition against educating black people, particularly during the period of American slavery, was a crucial element in maintaining the oppressive system. Anti-literacy laws in many slave states before and during the American Civil War affected slaves, freedmen, and in some cases all people of color. Some laws arose from concerns that literate slaves could forge the documents required to escape to a free state. According to William M. Banks, many slaves who learned to write did indeed achieve freedom by this method. The wanted posters for runaways would often mention whether the escapee could write. Anti-literacy laws also arose from fears of slave insurrection, particularly around the time of abolitionist David Walker's 1829 publication of Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, which openly advocated rebellion, and Nat Turner's Rebellion of 1831. In response to these and other uprisings, Southern states enacted even stricter laws against the education of slaves to maintain the rigid social hierarchy. Between 1740 and 1834, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, and Virginia all passed anti-literacy laws. South Carolina passed the first law which prohibited teaching slaves to read and write, punishable by a fine of 100 pounds and 6 months in prison, via an amendment to its 1740 Negro Act. Some slave owners blamed abolitionists for the supposed need for anti-literacy laws. For example, South Carolina's James H. Hammond, an ardent pro-slavery ideologue, wrote in a letter of his written in 1845 to the British abolitionist Thomas Clarkson,
I'm a hungry individual. I want to grow. I want to learn. I came across the Google Career Certificate. My thought.
In a letter of his written in 1845 to the British abolitionist Thomas Clarkson,
I can tell you, it was the abolition agitation. If the slave is not allowed to read his Bible, the sin rests upon the abolitionists, for they stand prepared to furnish him with a key to it, which would make it not a book of hope and love and peace, but of despair, hatred, and blood, which would convert the reader not into a Christian, but a demon. Allow our slaves to read your writings, stimulating them to cut our throats. Can you believe us to be such unspeakable fools?
This letter of James Hammond in 1845 is an ironclad proof of what may have
This is
instigated the
American history.
alterations of the words of the Holy Bible by white slaveholders. These were often plantation owners who fell into the category of aristocrats, royal families, political and religious leaders, presidents, senators. These are mostly lineages of all the American and European leaders that you ever heard of. These were those who had the power to do, and they did everything in their power at this point in history to ensure that their enslaved stayed enslaved. Such changes effected by people like these never goes away, unless pushed away, unless people eventually start to get wind of the secret plots and agendas of this bloody past, which had lingered long enough into this time and day for not being addressed, and start to change from them by not regarding them anymore. Generations have stayed that way, enslaved, because of things they know nothing about. So also the generations of these slavers who, in control for the longest time, might not be just enough to support these changes, as it would certainly deny them all their coveted gains, which over time turned into legitimate property. Numerous laws were enacted across the southern states to explicitly prohibit the education of black people. Allow me to give you a digest. Georgia, 1829, prohibited teaching blacks to read, punished by fine and imprisonment. Louisiana and North Carolina, 1830, passes law punishing anyone teaching blacks to read with fines, imprisonment, or floggings. Alabama and Virginia, 1832, prohibited whites from teaching blacks to read or write, punished by fines and floggings. Georgia, 1833, prohibited blacks from working in reading or writing jobs through what was called an employment law, and prohibited teaching blacks, punished by fines and whippings via an anti-literacy law. The Alabama Slave Code of 1833 included the following law. Any person who shall attempt to teach any free person of color or slave to spell, read, or write shall, upon conviction thereof by indictment, be fined in a sum of not less than $250, nor more than $500. At this time, Harper's Weekly published an article that stated, "The alphabet is an abolitionist. If you would keep a people enslaved, refuse to teach them to read." Missouri, 1847, prohibited assembling or teaching slaves to read or write. Here, the legislature of Missouri, on February 16, 1847, passed an act that prohibited Negroes and mulattoes from learning to read and write and assembling freely for worship services. The act also forbade the migration of free black people to the state. The penalty for anyone violating any of the law's provisions was a fine not to exceed $5,000, the equivalent of $180,000 today, a jail term not to exceed 6 months, or a combination of fine and jail sentence. Mississippi state law required a white person to serve up to a year in prison as penalty for teaching a slave to read. A 19th century Virginia law specified every assemblage of Negroes for the purpose of instruction in reading or writing, or in the nighttime for any purpose, shall be an unlawful assembly. Any justice may issue his warrant to any office or other person, requiring him to enter any place where such assemblage may be, and seize any Negro therein, and he, or any other justice, may order such Negro to be punished with stripes. In North Carolina, black people who disobeyed the law were sentenced to whipping while whites received a fine, jail time, or both. AME Bishop William Henry Hurd remembered from his enslaved childhood in Georgia that any slave caught writing suffered the penalty of having his forefinger cut from his right hand. Other formerly enslaved people had similar memories of disfigurement and severe punishments for reading and writing. The list just goes on and on. Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee were the only 3 slave states that did not enact a legal prohibition on educating slaves. It is estimated that only 5% to 10% of enslaved African Americans became literate to some degree before the American Civil War.
Want to get your hands on a couple of grand in just 3 minutes? Well, forget scrolling through social media and listen up.
Restrictions on the education of black students were not limited to the South. While teaching blacks in the North was not illegal, many northern states, counties, and cities barred black students from public schools. Until 1869, only whites could attend public schools in Indiana and Illinois. Ohio excluded black children from public schools until 1849, when it allowed separate schools for black students. Public schools were also almost entirely segregated in Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. Only Massachusetts had desegregated public schools before the Civil War. It barred segregation in public schools in 1855. An attempt in 1831 to open a college for black students in New Haven, Connecticut, was met with such overwhelming local resistance that the project was almost immediately abandoned. Private schools that attempted to educate black and white students together, often opened by abolitionists, were destroyed by mobs, as in the case of Noyes Academy in Canaan, New Hampshire, and the Quaker Prudence Crandall's female boarding school in Canterbury, Connecticut. After the Civil War, most northern states legally prohibited segregation in public schools, although it often continued in practice. Interestingly, nonetheless, educators and slaves in the South found ways to both circumvent and challenge the law. Despite the harsh restrictions, many blacks had sought education as a form of resistance and empowerment. The severe restrictions and risk involved would not deter them from doing what they must. These acts of defiance took various forms, from covert teaching and learning to outright rebellion. One example of this resistance was the famous Floating Freedom School. This is the ever-memorable history of John Berry Meacham, the remarkable black brother who had moved his school out of St. Louis, Missouri, when that state passed an anti-literacy law in 1847 and re-established it with the curious name Floating Freedom School. He had actually built this school on a floating steamship on the Mississippi River, so long as it was beyond the reach of Missouri state law, which was on the land. This black brother left land where he was banned and with his hard-earned money had painstakingly built a school on a river with some boat which he had reconstructed to fit as a classroom. This he had done because he was determined to keep his people educated. Another example here is Margaret Crittenden Douglas. After she was arrested, tried, and served a month in prison for educating free black children in Norfolk, Virginia, Margaret Crittenden Douglas wrote a book on her experiences, which helped draw national attention to the anti-literacy laws. Frederick Douglass, too, had taught himself to read while he was enslaved. He was a famed abolitionist who was able to escape enslavement, dedicated his free life to championing emancipation, as well as giving enslaved people access to education. In the first of his eventual 3 autobiographies, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, Douglass outlined not only how he became literate, but also the methods used by slave owners in order to keep slaves illiterate, thus keeping them submissive and obedient. The threat of physical and psychological trauma was used liberally against enslaved people in order to keep them from fighting back or running away. Douglass learned at a young age that it was dangerous for black people, and especially enslaved people, to know how to read and write. After Hugh Auld, one of Douglass's slave masters, learned that his wife Sophie had been teaching Douglass how to read, he turned seriously enraged. What Sophie Auld was doing was illegal at that time. Douglass says that Hugh Auld would often tell his wife,
"Teaching Douglass how to read would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master."
This sentiment echoed through Douglass's head as he continued pursuing literacy.
While they were announcing the TikTok ban, billions of dollars in...
You say, okay, that's just, well, James, that's just the past. Simply, let's see what is in the present. Watch this.
Think about it, 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 think about it.
Hey, what's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside. Check this video out, family. I've been doing many videos of the rise of inflations, the weakening of the US dollar, the economies that are falling apart, and how much of an effect it has in your community, especially the black community. Now, I want you to check this video out, and let's see what exactly they are saying.
Daryl Lloyd lives a modest lifestyle. He bought this 3-bedroom, 1-bath home in 2006 and paid cash $115,000.
I see 960 square feet. I don't have a second floor. I don't have a basement.
Just days ago, his home sweet home on Gardner Avenue in unincorporated Chicago Heights felt more like a nightmare.
I'm at a loss. So right now, I don't know what to do. I can't even sell the house because they see the taxes. Everybody gonna run.
This is the tax bill that Lloyd received last year, a little over $1,800. But this is the whopping bill he received last week, a property tax hike of over 3,811% for a total of over $30,000. The property was valued at over $1 million.
Nothing over here is worth $1 million.
The diesel mechanic and safety inspector is currently receiving disability after suffering an injury.
I was devastated. I'm like, let me look at the percentage, but I was literally devastated when I saw that that increase.
The Cook County Treasurer's Office says sadly Lloyd isn't the only homeowner with a large tax bill. The office conducted this analysis and found that, quote, the assessor's office acknowledged it erred in calculating land values for more than 4,400 homes in the south and southwest suburbs. That led to severe overassessments for homes on larger plots of land. The errors were discovered too late in the process for them to be corrected before tax bills were calculated, printed, and mailed.
The south suburbs, which were recently reassessed, are up 19%. And 15 of the south suburbs, which are 13 of which are in black areas, are up 30%. In black areas are up 30%.
In black areas are up 30%.
So we think that's significant, and we think it's extraordinarily significant because people are going to open up their mailboxes and they're going to say, what's going on? Well, the what's going on is here. This is our new programming. It's called Where Does Your Money Go? And it shows that this particular residence went up by $3,800, but it tells you which tax particular residence went up by $3,800, but it tells you which taxing district increased your taxes and by how much. In this instance, they're all Moores. Okay, so this is a residence. Then on this side, we have for you, I don't know if you can see this well enough, but this is a commercial building. Okay? But if I were not the treasurer and I was just like sitting in some storefront and I had like a crystal ball and I was going to make a prediction about the city of Chicago next year, I would say it's going up. I would say it's going up. And I would say residences are probably in for a shock. You know, if you know who the government is, you go to who's running that government, right? It's pretty simple. We did this so people would quit coming in there and saying, why did they go up? We just say, people keep saying, why did they go up? Why did they go up? It's pretty simple why they went up. Look at this. Look at these areas that drove it up. We're hoping that they go to those electeds, especially the state electeds, so that they can start to look at some sort of property tax reform in Springfield. Now, that's been going on since Truman left office. There have been thousands of reports about, how to correct the property tax system, and it just seems that it doesn't happen. Commercial buildings are empty. When the assessor comes in, he goes, I got to give this guy who owns this building a break. So if you give commercial a break and theirs go down, the residences go up. The residences go up. So that's pretty obvious. I mean, look at the Gold Coast. If the keys at Water Tower get turned back over to the bank and Water Tower is almost 50% empty, the tax bill is going to go down, and everybody who lives in the surrounding area is going to pay more to make up for the fact that commercial went down.
Did you hear what she just said? That as these commercial properties begin to close up, because many are sending either people home to work from home, or AI and computers are putting people out of work, the less money they can collect on commercial property or businesses, they will have to rise up your property taxes, which means gentrification over again. Isn't this a sly way like they have done? Raise the black communities up so that they squeeze them on those who are on a income that that is closed up, locked up because they're retired or receiving Social Security. I mean, this is a limited income, and it has effect on everyone. That your grandparents, your mom and dads will be squeezed out of their properties with little to none will be left for you when they come to take the house that you worked all these years to buy.
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
Lily Rayburn's disbelief came recently from a surging county tax bill for her home in South Suburban Harvey, from just under $2,300 last year to over $4,000 this year, just shy of double.
If this continues, I will lose my home. I cannot maintain that.
We were introduced to her by the mayor of Harvey.
We are not going to raise taxes.
As he introduced a plan to help take the heat off those feeling that pinch.
We are stopping the bleeding from people who cannot afford to pay their tax bills.
He's promising 2025's taxes to City Hall will be identical to those this year, no jump, with 2 exceptions: police and fire pensions and paying bondholders. The rest, his city, which is facing a $149 million deficit, will stay the same. Everything else you can elect to turn the valve off on?
If from my knowledge, yes, we can. Mathematically, it's sound.
And have you talked to your city council about this?
Yes, I have.
And it's all green lit?
Well, I'd say the vast majority, yes.
So it's not a done deal, it's what you're proposing.
No, it's a done deal as far as we're concerned, because I've talked to enough of our alderpersons where we know we have the votes to pass.
Now, did you just hear what he just said? Now, do you really believe? I mean, I'll try to give the brother as much credit as I can, but he has aldermen and other people who have to vote these type of things away so people don't get the property taxes raised. But don't believe for 1 second, just because he says so, that it's not going to happen. You can put your head in the sand. The white woman already said prices will be going up in 2025. There's no stopping it, family. They're coming after you like they came after the brother, they came after the sister, and they're coming after many more people. And we're the ones who are to stand the losses greater than any other race of people. This is your man.
So what do you think? So it seems like they say at the past, it's just the past, right? Wow. Yeah. Wow. But guess what? We have a situation that you think is more suffering. Check this out.
Hey, it's Maddie. Ready to really get rewarded? Join Ticker and get access to tons of shareholder discounts from the brand.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my channel, Runaway Slave. I would like to give a big up to all my subs and supporters who like, comment, and share the videos. In addition, a special big up to all those who purchased my masterpiece, my book, The N-Word is No Secret in the Service. Big up to you all. Let's cook.
Okay, people. First, I have to say big shout out to a sub, Maui, for inspiring this video, and also condolences to the family of Noah Bush. Noah Bush, 8-year-old black child out of Wayne County, Georgia, Jessup to be exact. Back in May, Noah Bush went outside with 2 white friends. We believe they are brothers, 10 and 11-year-old white brothers. 2 white friends that he thought were trustworthy. He went out with them, and Noah never came home. So being that Noah never came home, his family, the authorities, everybody went out looking for Noah. They can't find him. They couldn't find him that day, that night, or whatever. And the next day, they found Noah's body in a construction borrow pit. Okay, they found his body the next day in a borrow pit. And this pit is a deep hole that they dig, you know, for building materials at construction sites. So when they dig these deep holes, of course, when it rains and things like that, these deep holes fill up with water. And they say that Noah drowned in this deep pit. Of course, like I said, it had water in it. And people by now, as black people, we know the routine. Of course, law enforcement said no foul play. But Noah's family never believed the word. They felt that something was wrong because they know Noah, this is their child, and they know he would never, ever go near water. He was scared of water. And myself, I even seen a video of Noah a few years earlier at the beach running from the water. He does not mess around with the water, okay? So his family said, no, this did not happen. Noah did not take his shoes off and go past a no trespassing sign and get in water and drown. Not him, okay? Noah did not jump in his water and drown. So his family, what they did was they got a private investigator to look deeper into this. In addition, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation also launched an inquiry, and they interviewed the children who Noah went out with that night, the 2 white boys. And of course, they told them themselves, they did it. These boys pushed Noah in the water for whatever beef left him there, okay? And due to this, the 11-year-old is facing charges of simple battery, trespassing, and involuntary manslaughter, and concealing the death of another, and a 10-year-old is facing charges of trespassing and concealing the death of another. So bottom line is, people, Noah felt as though these boys were trustworthy and they got to this place, which they probably already planned. I can't prove that, but we can prove that they pushed Noah in this pit and he drowned. After he drowned, after they pushed him, they just went home. It's that stupid and cold, y'all. It's that stupid and cold. After they pushed them in there, knowing what they did, they went straight home. I feel as though their mother should be arrested too, because she knew about this, unless she actually called the police or the authorities when they went home and they said, Mom, we did this. If she didn't do that and didn't do anything, or maybe they never told her, I don't know, that she should probably be arrested too. Condolences to the family of Noah Bush again. Now this story is very similar to another one that I covered on one of these channels, which is the Christopher Capessa story in the UK. You can check that out. Went to the water with white buddies, pushed him in the water. It's that simple. He died. Another story that's also similar to this one is a story that I recently just covered in the Pennsylvania suburbs. Black teenager by the name of Justin Johnson, lured out of the house by white teens. Okay, he goes out with these white teens and then he's seen running for his life. He's running so fast and hard to get away from these white terrorists that he gets home, collapses on the floor, passes away. His father finds him. He does have sickle cell, but in addition, I'm pretty sure there's something else involved in that as well. You know, that thing that they made people go out and get, you know. But anyway, he's running for his life and he collapses. It's that stupid. Just recently, another story, Christopher Gilbert in Louisiana. He goes out with white friends, some restaurant type bar place. The white girl pushes him in the water, leaves him there to drown. Christopher Gilbert, his black mother's out there, his family, they're speaking about this. They're saying it's wrong, it's terrible. They pushed him in there. Somebody has to be held accountable. But this dummy Christopher Gilbert, he survived. And when he did, he defended the white people who pushed him in the water. He's a grown man, people. Christopher Gilbert, unlike many of these other people, these stories, 8 years old, 8 years of age, in their teens. I'll give them a pass for a lot of things, but Christopher Gilbert, he's a grown man. I don't care. He's a dummy, okay? And Christopher Gilbert, you absolutely suck as a human being. You're a detriment to your people. You embarrassed and disrespected your mother, and you have no respect for yourself. Anyway, let's keep it moving.
As I always say, you're selling the sexiest product on earth, money. So how much was the total commission on that deal?
So, for a lot of our people, look, man, I think many of our people think this junk ain't for real, man. I think many of our people think that this is a joke. I think that a lot of our people think that a lot of videos like this and others are just radical entertainment. I think that many of us see stories like this and think, wow, and ooh, look at this. And they just keep it moving, you know. No talking, you know, the information that they see in these type videos, they don't use it. And I think that many of our people have become addicted to traumatic entertainment. As long as their people aren't the victim, as long as their loved one is not the victim, they watch these things, they read these stories in the news, they see it, it's traumatic entertainment to them, and they go back to doing the same thing. And I also noticed something else. When it comes to these situations where black people are victimized and brutalized by white people, I've noticed that a lot of our people, okay, do this whole I told you so debating with white people, going back and forth on different social media places, almost like it's a joke or something like that. Like they do this whole I told you so. Now look, this what happened. Look, he ain't do this. You know, going back and forth with white people with this whole I told you so, trying to prove a point. And when these people do this, they appear as though that they care about these situations, but they don't. They just joining in on the drama, barking and trying to prove a point to Whitey, who came and might have said something, trying to get the last word. I notice in a lot of situations, I see quite a few of our people acting like that. And I think it's some real sick stuff to me, it's a sign that they aren't taking these things serious, okay? Because I noticed that so many of our people are so desensitized that they are into this whole balloon release, justice for this person, that person, justice for him or her. This has become almost like a celebration to them. It's like a weird type of activism that a lot of black people are used to where as though they are like attracted to these whole justice for this, I stand with this, balloon release and cute funeral type things, and seeing the whole breakdown on TV and the outrage. I think that some of our people are so desensitized and thrown off from being traumatized that this has become some kind of weird addiction. You know what I mean? It's to the point where I think a lot of our people think that just making a post or saying that they support something is stopping it, as opposed to thinking, sitting back and trying to change their behaviors. You know what I mean? It's really getting sick. Now, this situation with this young black child, Noah, he went out with these white friends who didn't like him, but he thought were his friends. This could have been avoided. How could this have been avoided? You don't go out with white friends at the age of 8. Because at the age of 8, a black child, Noah Bush or any black child at the age of 8, is not ready. They don't understand white people. They don't understand white people, okay? And Noah Bush was not ready to go out at age 8. Age 8, I'm not, that's a whole nother story. But he wasn't ready to be out with white people. There are black people who are 30 that aren't ready to be around white people. They just can't handle it, okay? So in this situation, just say for instance, Noah is in a situation where he just doesn't have anybody else to play with but these white people. Okay, I get it. Well, when you black, your life is different. And regardless of the illusion and all the fake buffoonery that you see on TV, a black life is different. Okay? There's a line drawn between white and black, as much as they try to show you that it's not like that. Okay? The only time that these situations where you typically see white and black people together or looking like they get along are situations where white people are making money off of black people, sporting events, working for them, rap music, things like that. But that's a whole different topic. Situations where white people are making money off of black people, and that's it. It's all fake, it's not real. At age 8, if Noah wanted friends and the white friends are the only ones are around, okay, I get it. This is how you do this. The black parents have to control that whole situation. The black guardian, whoever it may be, they have to control that whole situation where they say, okay, he's got to play with these white children. Well, tell him to come here. You can't go walking off with them. The black guardian, the black parents, whoever, black grandparents, whoever they may be, have to have full control of the perimeter. That's what it is. I know where they at. I know where to go get them at. I know what they doing. They right there. They right here. They got to have full control of the perimeter and full control of the situation. There's going to be no situation where a black child is locked up in a house with white people or at their white pool with nobody around or going out fishing on a lake with people, with white people, and there's no black situation. In these situations, if there's no other option and this black child has to go outside, run around and be with white people, the black guardian has to have full control. No, they can't. You can't go over there. They can come over here though. That's what it is. That's the way you solve it. It may be exhausting, but if you ain't got the energy, find a way. Drink some espresso, whatever you got to do. Take less hours at work. You need to have the energy. That's what being black is about.
I'm gonna leave right there. And with any, you have to watch your children, whoever they hang out with. My thing is this: the reason why I show this video is because everybody thinks something is in the past, stays in the past. This stuff goes from generation after generation after generation. It's something spiritual behind this. And as people, we have to figure out what it is. And I said this before, and I say it again. America has a spirit of racism. And every time, and I was thinking this today, how some people in this country deep down, even though we don't like to think like this, but when it comes to another person of a different religion or different skin tone, some of us don't know how to wave that to aside. We really kind of feel more connected with the people we have who look more like us. And even though there are some people who are not like that, and it might be a small percentage of people, but it's the grander percentage of people who are put on the face and act like that. And I want to show you that, and Neely Fuller said it, we're in our captivity. Clearly. That's what it is. And this proves it. I mean, it's passing down from one generation to now these children experiencing things that we've experienced. You tell me that our forefathers experienced. You tell me what has changed. He made, this is the last point. What has changed? Now you see why some people feel, as far as how some black people feel. Now, if anybody's non-black that sees, now you see why. This is what we're trying to tell you. You know, this is why I made this video, to show you that the past doesn't, and if some people think it's over, no, it transforms into another way, another form. Racism don't go away. No matter what they do, racism will not go away till God do something with this earth. Because it's generation. And you see how 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, racism is still in the land. It's still in the land. And people don't want to talk and people want to disregard it. So black people, white people want to disregard it. You have black people want to disregard it, and other people. But they don't understand you in the land that it is bedded into it under the illusion of patriotism. And if you think about the South, what the story about the South was, that's what the Civil War was about. It was about continuing that business to go. It wasn't about freeing those people. It's about business. That's what it was really about. It wasn't about, and it's like, wait a minute, you disrupting our business. We're going to lose our land, so we're going to do what we got to do. But yet, they tell black people that go to the past, but they reenact the past every time they dress up in Civil War. But they said, well, why do they always dress up in Civil War? Because behind something like that, that's what the whole Civil War was started about. And let me say this again: it was Civil War back then, in centuries. It's going to be a Civil War again. Before it become a major war in America, it will be another Civil War. Why? Because it's a spirit. It don't go away. And then you have the descendants of the people still carrying that spirit. There are descendants that still think that black people are like that till this day. Among individuals who are white. Not every white person, but there are white people who think like this. They carry that from generation to generation. They taught that in their home. For what I showed you the video. The proof is in the pudding right there. And anybody can get mad, get denied, even somebody might unsubscribe. But you can't deny the truth. That's the truth. The truth is the truth. And if we don't face the truth, we're going to suffer the consequences. That's what's going to happen. And if America don't do right by the people who are descendants of the slaves, they will pay. This country is on the verge of collapsing. And they don't understand why. That's one of the many reasons why. one of the many reasons, immorally, why we're gonna collapse. They don't see, but it's coming. So, all right then, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this has been an interesting video, and maybe pray that one day change, and hey, maybe that's why maybe you should leave America, because it's not gonna look good in the upcoming years, as far as taxes and everything. Think about it. Till next time, I hope you take care. Be blessed.